Hi, my name's Rhiannon. I'm currently the New South Wales and ACT chapter lead for the River Basin Management Society. I realise a lot of you wouldn't be familiar with the River Basin Management Society. We are an organisation based throughout Australia. Our aim is to share knowledge, connect people in waterways, wetlands and water policy. And we're a really diverse community of practice. We're driven by members, so everyone who runs this organisation is a volunteer. And we're all really passionate people who meet up and run these awesome events. So thank you all so much for coming along. So why are we here? We had the 11th Australian Stream Management Conference in Victor Harbour in August, and we had 218 people there, which is really amazing, from most states in Australia. I think it's the first time we had people from Western Australia. So the theme of this conference was interweaving water knowledge, share knowledge and practice within water management in Australia, and let's celebrate our achievements. So for the first time ever, we joined this with the awards gala. So we celebrated projects from all throughout Australia. And tonight, the idea of these sessions is that we are sharing some highlight presentations from New South Wales and ACT, and we want to bring people together in our own states so we can share our knowledge and also connect. So I want to chat to you afterwards, and if you want to run an event, we've got a great network. Let's share what you're doing. I would like to start by inviting up Aunty Theresa Dargin. And Aunty Theresa is a next generation's elder of the Newcastle Worimi Community and is a spiritual healer. As a traditional custodian of our sacred home, Aunty Theresa stands to teach our next generation's law. And I'll also say that that's law, L-O-R-E, and dreaming of humanity. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us.
Okay, Marambul, thank you for having me. It's so in Garang language, I just want to acknowledge that Marambul is thank you. First off, I would like to introduce myself. Yes, my name is Theresa Dargin. Next few generations will begin to know me as Aunty Theresa. And as the next generation's elder, I should say, I don't identify as an elder as yet, because we still have 3 elders remaining. So with practice, I identify as the next generation's elder. So it's in respect of those who are still remaining on country. But as traditional custodians of these lands and waterways, my role now as Aunty Theresa is to make sure that I'm educating the next few generations and those who sit before me, such as this beautiful group, and those within other areas of communities, is I'm meant to actually bring everybody together. Because of the reason that we've sort of been in different spaces of knowledge, and we are all traditional in some kind of way, okay? And that's how I sort of want to bring forward is that what our job is to make sure that we share our knowledge. We could be traditional or we could be custodians. The thing is, country is very, very important to us as 8 generations born on country here in the Newcastle and Carrington area. So Carrington Onibigamba is necessarily 6 generations of our bloodline. So what my job is to make sure, whilst I still have 3 elders remaining, is to still keep on obtaining that knowledge of what country is providing for us. Most of the time, country on our waterways is providing our crabs, so our guttagans, and then also our fish, so our muckles. Now, in regards to our food source, sometimes what we're noticing now as traditional custodians and knowledge holders of the Throsby Creek catchment, which is running within Carrington, what we're noticing is our crabs and our fishes. They're actually getting smaller and smaller. So in memory and as traditional custodian, whilst we've sort of been brought up 6 generations on those waterways, what we're seeing is that the sizes are limited now. Used to be this big, where their claws would be out, you know, where there would be heaps of meat within those crabs. But now they're like this. So we're seeing all this different change. So my job now as Next Generation's elder, and my elders have given me permission, is to practice on country. So making sure that I'm educating. So whilst I'm educating, we've formed Spiritual Waterways Indigenous Corporation. So that incorporation is necessarily to make sure that we're bringing everybody together to connect to country. So our country once a month, and all the elders before me and the next generations are necessarily coming to the space of the mangroves to make sure that we're keeping them clean and the waterways clean. So that's the last Sunday of every month, everyone. Please follow us on social media, which is Spiritual Waterways. You will find all the contacts and all the necessarily next notices of when the low tides are happening on those last Sundays. We have 2 remaining this year. And unfortunately, just Sunday that just went was our cleanup. And believe me, I haven't seen it like that with rubbish for a long time. So now with discussions and consults, we've got to make sure that we're communicating in the best way possible, no matter which group you're from. I'm hoping that we could come together as one so we can actually communicate who's come in before us. But what we're noticing is that the Sunday that's just went, and we're not quite sure as traditional custodians as yet because we haven't consulted or communicated with anybody else if they've come in before us. For example, the week before or 2 weeks before that. But again, spiritually, as traditional custodians, we are very spiritual people. So we more as I speak to our country, we allow our Mother Earth to talk to us too. And of that week, there was a full moon. So that tells us that those tides are rising. That full moon is a different energy to the last one. So as traditional custodians and spiritual healers, we've got to make sure that we're still listening to our mother, we're still paying respects there, but unfortunately we're not communicating with one another, which is the saddest of them all. So as traditional custodians, we are still in different consults and different groups where we're sort of communicating with others, and then there's a majority that we're not communicating with. So again, please, if there is any way of getting some information out there, Newcastle City Council have been working with us for a while. So we do have some internal, I think, communication in that space. But again, community-wise, we're seeing probably maybe 10 at the minimum to maximum of 30, 40 people that's helping us clean the mangroves once a month. Okay. Again, unfortunately, yes, our crabs are limited and they are smaller than what they used to be when we were growing up. But we're not going to give up on country. We're not going to give up on keeping our waterways clean. We're also going to be making sure that the education that we're providing as Next Generation's elders are very important for those that have been born now. Because yes, I am a grandmother. I do have a 3-year-old granddaughter. Yes. So yeah, I get to teach a little bit more, which is language, and language is very important. So I'm going to welcome you here on country as the Next Generation's elder. And as traditional custodians of these lands, I pay my respects to the ancestors who have walked these lands before us. I pay my respects to our elders who are past and also who are present within this room here. Most importantly, I do and I will acknowledge the next few generations of smart ones. They are the ones that are going to make the biggest change that we have ever seen. And with each and every single one of us coming together as one, we will eventually be able to guide them in the right way. No division because of skin colour, right? And because of cultures. LORE is very important for me that I teach that because it's the law of humanity itself. It is us. It is all of us as a human being. So yes, please help me do that, everyone. I know it's hard, but we can do this. So in respect of my grandfather, 2 generations ago, Leonard Andrew Dates, who actually was a very strong man, but unfortunately, policies and legislations wasn't very kind 2 generations ago. So he had to become a white man, I should say. Okay, he's kept us safe. So I always acknowledge my grandfather because he was the strongest of them all. And yes, he did speak the Garang language very fluently. So in our Garang language, for 5 years, everyone, I've been learning our traditional language. So again, Marunbul, thank you for having me. So Weeble and Guji Eagle, hello and welcome. So Min Yang Nurong Wubelan, Yura Yegu Marala Baragu, Yegu Tangu Babara, Kitang Nurang, Jui Yegu. I welcome you here on Baragu, our country of the Garang speaking people of this country. So please, yes, let's work together. Let's make the biggest change. And I look forward to working with each and every single one of you. Please find me. You'll see me. I'm over at Carrington. Okay. Every Sunday. So from 2 to 4 every Sunday. And the last Sunday of every month, we'll be cleaning the mangroves. It's our job. All right. Marunbul, thank you. Gapul, I'll see you soon.
Wow, what a special welcome. Thank you, Aunty Theresa. Hopefully, maybe we could get a few of us to head down together, even from our workplaces, and go and help clean up the mangroves. We could make it a RBMS event. I think that'd be great. So let's get the speakers going. First off, I'd like to welcome Professor Kirstie Fryirs from Macquarie University. So Kirstie teaches fluvial geomorphology, and her work focuses on river management, how rivers work, how they evolve, and how they have been impacted by anthropogenic disturbance. Welcome, Kirstie. I think a lot of you would be familiar with river styles, and Kirstie's been a major part of that. And it really helps a lot. Even at SOACON, we use it a lot. So welcome.
While we're just setting that up, I'd like to thank Rhiannon and Jenny and Drew, I don't know if Drew's here, for the invitation to come and speak to you today. Some of you will have heard this presentation before. I've done it several times in different sorts of forums. I'm going to speak today about how we deliver natural flood management, which has become a very hot topic, particularly after all of the catastrophic flooding that we had in 2021-22. At Macquarie University, we are just about to embark on a brand new 4-year research program in all coastal catchments of New South Wales. We've got quite a large research team to investigate where we can start to deliver natural flood management for all coastal catchments in New South Wales. And so I'd like to acknowledge the industry partners on that work. It's a $1.3 million research program over the next wee while, which is why I look so tired. So you'll be hearing a lot more about it. This paper on natural flood management, the written version of it, was awarded the Best Paper prize at the gala at the 11 ASM. And the River Styles Initiative, which was a co-nomination between Macquarie University and DQ, and in particular Fergus, who's up the back there, won the 11 ASM award for building knowledge in waterways management. And it was a pretty tough field, so we're pretty chuffed that award has come to New South Wales for the River Styles work that we've been doing over the last several decades. And I brought the awards along just so that you can see them up the back there. They're great cheese platters, and at the moment they're just sitting in my office, so I thought I better bring them along and spruik them a little bit. So anyway, it was a great evening, and we're pretty chuffed that we were able to. We're getting the chat on the middle of the screen, so thanks, Nicole. So we all know what the issue is, okay? We urgently need to build resilience into river systems so they can withstand more intense and arguably more frequent catastrophic flooding. And we all witnessed this in the 2021-22 floods, which were particularly severe and catastrophic in the north coast of New South Wales, southeast Queensland, and in many other places. Some of those floods that were experienced in those years were the largest on record in terms of their recorded history of flooding. And the insured losses are quite substantial. So the running cost at the moment is about 6.41 billion. And it's predicted that by 2050, Australia's annual extreme weather cost is likely to be about 32.5 billion. So really, we're at one of these crossroads. How are we going to enhance the resilience of river systems to withstand some of these catastrophic floods going forward? And is there some way that we can use nature-based solutions to enhance that resilience, to build that resilience so that we can build some of this mitigation capacity into river systems at the scale needed to achieve natural flood management? So the 2022 New South Wales Government inquiry into the floods has given us a green light to go ahead with nature-based solutions and to try and work with river systems to deliver natural flood management. And I've been very, very excited to see this report, and anybody who's heard me speak on this before, my voice tone goes up when I read these recommendations. I was sitting in my office and I was quite pessimistic when this report came out. I thought, oh no, we're going to go back to the bad old days, you know, of river engineering, no disrespect to my engineer colleagues. But really, quite frankly, these recommendations are fantastic. And they are world leading on a global sort of scale. When I put this up in front of a global audience, they're like, wow, can we get some of that too? So there's a couple of key recommendations in the back of that inquiry that we can work with. Recommendation 20 is to consider floodplains as an asset. So including letting watercourses largely flow naturally rather than implementing engineering barriers such as flood levees and mitigation schemes to stop floods. Brilliant, thank you. Recommendation 27 in the environment section is to develop an Indigenous-led cultural landscape restoration strategy for nature-based flood mitigation and adaptation, which would see large-scale revegetation and wetland restoration. Brilliant, thank you. So we've got this, it's in a government inquiry, and these are recommendations that have been adopted in principle. But this is slowly getting into flood risk management plans in some places in coastal catchments of New South Wales, and the most recent version of that is starting to emerge in the Hawkesbury Nepean. So when we're talking about delivering natural flood management using nature-based solutions, what are we talking about? Okay, well, in our context, we're talking about building river recovery, enhancing river recovery through the use of processes that are already occurring in the landscape. And so from our context, as a geomorphologist, as an environmental scientist, when we're talking about river recovery, we're talking about these different components and the effect that they have on flood hydrology. So river recovery in coastal catchments of New South Wales has been happening since the 1980s. It's a decadal process, but the river systems are improving their condition and they are recovering. So this is really, really exciting. We're at that point where we can start to build on these fantastic foundations. So when we're talking about recovery, I'm talking about geomorphic recovery, which is defined as a noticeable improvement in the physical structure and function of rivers. Vegetative recovery is a noticeable improvement in the quantity and the quality of in-stream and riparian vegetation. And when you put that structural component together with the vegetative component, that produces roughness. Roughness is good for rivers. It slows flood flows down. It provides that mitigation effect. So this leads to hydrological recovery, trying to slow flood flows down and trying to have some sort of effect on stage height. So hydrological recovery is defined as a slowing and a lowering of moderate and major floods, aka natural flood management. So here's one example where we are starting to see signals of natural flood management occurring because of these changes in the geomorphic and the vegetative roughness. So our classic example is Warwick Brook, which is not so far from here, whereby we are seeing changes in the structure, the geomorphology of the river system. They're becoming more heterogeneous, they're becoming rougher. So we're seeing geomorphic recovery over decadal timeframes in many, many river systems. We're also seeing extensive regreening along all coastal catchments of New South Wales. So particularly in terms of increasing the amount of woody vegetation and the coverage of that vegetation along pretty much all stream networks in coastal catchments of New South Wales. So in some places, this has been quite dramatic. In Wollombi, for example, we're getting really quite rough river systems. So this vegetative roughness is a really, really important component. And this is having an effect on the hydrology. So on the right-hand side here, we are seeing changes in the characteristics of floods because of this increased roughness, this geomorphic and these vegetative components. So here's one example for the Hunter River here, whereby we took the 1971 flood and compared that to the Pashabolka storm in 2007, when the Pashabolka was just out here, out the back. And we had a look at the characteristics of those two floods, which were of comparable stage height, okay, so of comparable water level. And we can see that the travel time of the peak has slowed significantly between those two timeframes. And we think that this is because of the improvement in condition, geomorphic and vegetative, that's producing that roughness. So we are seeing signals that some of these floods and some of the large floods are slowing down because of this roughness. Sadly, not quite yet are we seeing full natural flood management, which would mean attenuation or a lowering of flood heights in a downstream direction. So we have very encouraging signs that we're on the right track and we have fantastic foundations to work from. So what happened during the 2021-22 floods? Well, they were big floods. And so when the floods were happening, we were doing lots of back of the envelope calculations to see whether any of these signals of flood mitigation or natural flood management were also occurring for these catastrophic floods. And I didn't think we would see many signals because they were big floods, right? And we thought, no, this roughness is going to, pun intended, get washed out because of the sheer scale of some of these floods. However, we did see in some places some effects, some natural flood management occurring. So don't get too scared by this graph. What we were doing was we were essentially taking all of our coastal catchments from the north, from the Richmond, right down through to the Bega in the south on the right-hand side of the graph. And all you need to know is that any of the bars that are below the line means that those floods, the 2021-22 floods, were slower than their equivalent historical floods, just like I showed you between the 71 and the 2007. And you can see that a significant number of these catchments are showing that these floods were a lot slower than their historical equivalents. Some places like the poor old Richmond, up Lismore Way and so on were not showing some of these effects. So it's a patchy record, but we are seeing some of these signals that the floods are becoming noticeably slower. So the travel time of those floods is slowing down. We can also see with some individual examples that the characteristics of these floods are also changing. They're becoming less flashy. So the one on the left-hand side for Wollombi in 89 is quite a flashy, steep rise, steep fall, very flashy flood. Whereas the 2021 has a much more flatter profile to it. So the peaks are flattening, the rate of rise is a lot slower, and they're travelling a lot slower. And that's because of this roughness slowing down some of these flood flows. Quite significant and statistically significant changes in that flood hydrology. Sadly, that's where the good news ends, because the 2021-22 floods, there's not yet enough roughness in these river systems to attenuate those flows. And when we use the word attenuation, what we're looking for is a lowering of the flood levels as you move downstream, okay? Attenuation needs to be created by getting much more roughness in your catchment to try and have some sort of effect on flood speed, but also in terms of flood volume. Okay, so while we're starting to see slowing, we're not yet seeing lowering. So they're slowing, but not lowering. So we've still got a little bit of work to do in terms of delivering full natural flood management. So what do we need to do now? I've got 3 key slides here to talk about how we can use river recovery as a nature-based flood mitigation tool. That's a first. Okay, 1, Okay, value add on the geomorphic and vegetative and hydrological recovery that's already occurring. After the floods, I was doing lots of community forums in many places, and there was a real sense of sort of despair. People were going, oh, all that work we've been doing for decades, you know, was it wasted? I'm like, no, it wasn't. Because if that work hadn't been done, we would be in a whole world of pain right now, right? We'd be back in the 1940s and 50s where these river systems were catastrophically changing and adjusting because the landscape was in such poor condition. So I think we've got to try and turn that messaging around to give people hope that we are on the right track and we are seeing some of these effects of all the good work that's been happening over the last several decades. So we believe, and we can model, that we need to start working at the landscape scale, and we need to start thinking about our rivers as corridors, not just individual reaches where we go and do little bits of work, but thinking about building resilience along corridors of rivers. And so we've done some work now to identify where we could build corridors of geomorphic and vegetative recovery for all coastal catchments of New South Wales. And so the image on the right-hand side is the prioritisation where these corridors could be built to increase that roughness, build that resilience, and to focus some of our management efforts, because we're simply not going to have enough funding to roll everything out everywhere. We need to be much more strategic about where we work so that we can build some of this resilience into these river systems. So of the 87,000 kilometres of stream length, about 4.5 could be prioritised now to help start to build some of this resilience and some of these corridors. We're going to need to dramatically upscale our efforts, and we're going to have to pull all of the levers that we have available to us as river managers and as communities. We can do a lot of work at the local scale in terms of channel and reach scale, increasing the roughness of our river systems geomorphologically and vegetatively. But we need to upscale that to the valley scale to build these corridors and to also start thinking about, going back to that recommendation in the inquiry, about how we can utilise some of these floodplain assets. Okay, so thinking about floodplains, they're called floodplains for a reason. They act as detention basins during flooding events. And thinking about how we might utilise floodplains a little bit better and incentivise landowners or communities to allow those rivers to flood into those floodplains and provide some of those mitigation effects. And if we're going to see full natural flood management, we're going to have to be thinking at the catchment scale, and we're going to have to build resilience into river systems at a scale that's going to provide those mitigation effects, particularly for big floods. So I think we're some ways, and we're a long way along in terms of delivering lever 1 and 2, but lever 3 is probably a longer term target that I think we could at least try and achieve. So we're going to model some of this stuff over the next few years to provide some actual evidence for the types of rivers that we're working in coastal catchments of New South Wales to deliver where we might be able to deliver natural flood management in reality. Full-scale natural flood management. So my final 5 minutes, beauty. This is the slide that everyone was captured by at the 11 ASM, because I was trying to come up with a way of trying to communicate to people that natural flood management has become like the hottest topic. And just planting a strip of vegetation along a river channel is not going to deliver natural flood management. So there's a lot of activity going on in this space, right? And I think we need to sort of all calm down and think about what is realistically achievable in terms of natural flood management. Where can we actually deliver natural flood management? And what are some of the conundrums that we're going to have to communicate to communities and to the public so that we're not over-promising and then under-delivering down the track? So to deliver full natural flood management, slowing and lowering, we're going to have to work on all of those 3 levers at all of those 3 scales. That's the utopian vision out there. Okay, that's a much longer term vision. But there are some things that we can do now and over the short to medium term that are going to deliver different aspects of natural flood management. We can deliver on the slowing. I truly believe we can deliver on the slowing down of those flood flows by building that resilience. And that's sitting on the left-hand side here. Okay, so if floods are slower but not lower, they're less flashy, they're less erosive, and therefore there's less land lost through catastrophic river change. The duration of inundation may be longer, and we're just going to have to accept that, okay, as communities, but that's up to us to communicate that. If you're going to get slowing, it means the water's going to sit around in the landscape for a bit longer. That's just how rivers work. And so we have to be very, very careful about how we communicate that. However, I think we can pitch that in terms of the juicy stuff, the good stuff, the fine-grained sediments are going to be deposited on your floodplain. And you're going to have rehydration of those floodplains, right? Because the water's sitting around for longer and you're not getting all of this catastrophic gravels and sands and so on deposited on your floodplains. So the benefits, I think, are there, and we need to pitch it in that term, in those terms. There will be longer duration, so maybe more time for floodplain moisture replenishment, and they'll be slower. So greater time for emergency response. If we can forecast this a little bit more effectively, if you've got extra 10 hours, right, then, you know, that's a really good thing in terms of things like emergency response. So I think we can deliver on the left-hand side, and I think there's benefits there. Communicating those benefits is really important. If floods are faster but not lower, so say we go and rip out all the vegetation, reduce that roughness, then I think that's a negative, okay? There are no benefits on that side as far as I'm concerned. They're faster, they're more flashy, they're more erosive, more soil loss, less replenishment of soil moisture and so on. We get all the nasty stuff being deposited on floodplains. They're a lot faster. And so in terms of things like emergency response, we get into lots of sorts of difficulties. So I think this is all about communicating the reality check of what we can deliver on natural flood management. I believe we can do this, and I think we can aim for that. So my concluding remarks. We do need to build an evidence base, a much stronger evidence base, and that's what we're intending to do over the next 4 years. We have some evidence in place already that we are starting to see signals of natural flood management. We really need to test the appetite of managers and communities to implement NFM in practice. It's central in other places in the world. In the UK, it's very, very big. In Australia, we really haven't looked at it to any significant extent. We can work with what we've already got. So it's a really good news story. River recovery is happening. We can enhance that and we can improve that and deliver some of these other co-benefits as well. But we need to prioritise where the reality check is, where it is possible to deliver some of these flood mitigation signals. And so we're going to have to upscale and we're going to have to coordinate our efforts if we're going to achieve that over the short, the medium and the long term. And we need to use all of those levers that we have available to us. So that's the end. Thank you.
Next up, I'd like to welcome Andy Lowe's. Andy is the Program Manager for the Australian River Restoration Centre. If you haven't looked up the Australian River Restoration Centre, you should. They have a lot of amazing resources, particularly on stakeholder engagement, how to talk about rivers and how to help landholders to understand them. Andy's going to be talking about, the presentation is Interweaving Love, Knowledge and Action. How are we bringing back the Murray-Darling Basin's forgotten river?
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ree, and thanks everyone for having me up here to speak today. And thank you, Aunty Theresa, for the warm welcome to country. So really nice to be up here in this part of the world. And I'd like to acknowledge country and pay respect to elders past, present and future on the lands that we're meeting on today, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Upper Murrumbidgee River, which is the patch I'll be speaking about today. And that's a lovely photo of it there, just on the edge of Canberra. Just see if I can. There we are. That sounds all right. Ooh. Probably too high now. I get to speak about this work, but you'll notice there's a heap of names across the bottom, and Ree's just introduced the Australian River Restoration Centre. So I do really want to acknowledge the team that sits behind a lot of the work, especially Dr. Shuan Lovett, who's the founder and CEO of the Restoration Centre. And without her, a lot of the, everything I'm about to show you just wouldn't have happened. So I really want to acknowledge the team there. Is this just making sure it shows? Oh yeah, just. No, that's all right. I guess while that's coming up, so I work for the Australian River Restoration Centre, but I'm also the chair of the Upper Murrumbidgee Catchment Network, which is a voluntary network across ACT and New South Wales region for the Upper Murrumbidgee River. All right. It was a lovely drive up here as well today from Canberra. So I made it, I think, with about 10 minutes to spare. So I'm really glad to be up here, and that I made it up here with a couple of minutes left over. Magic. Thanks, mate. So first I'm going to start with this photo, which is of us as kids. So I'm Canberra born and bred and really proud to be from Canberra. I really love the place. And in the southern part of Canberra, which is really close to the Murrumbidgee River. So it's only about a 10-minute walk from my house. So not surprising growing up. We found ourselves down there every other weekend. And so that's me jumping off the rock with that weird look on my face. You only got one chance with the camera back then and you just had to go with it. That's my brother Simon behind me there, and I'll mention him throughout the speak. My cousin from Adelaide, and that's my sister hanging out there in the water. And nobody's been able to explain why there's a pair of shoes on the rocks, no matter who we've asked. So, but my cousin from Adelaide, so he's come over from Adelaide, and so we've gone, okay, let's head down to the river and muck around. So we're there swimming, fishing, yabbying, sending the old air mattress down the rapids. It was a lot of fun, and I think that's where my love of river systems came from. So I then went to the University of Canberra, studied environmental science, and then from 2012 to 2022, I worked at two Commonwealth agencies, the Commonwealth Environmental Water Holder and the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. And I guess my key role in there was delivering environmental water or environmental flows or water for the environment, whichever one you want to use, in these major river systems in the southern Murray-Darling Basin. So big river systems like the Goulburn in Victoria, the Murray itself, the Murrumbidgee downstream of the major storages, and the lower Darling Barker River that comes in there, right through to the Murray mouth, the lower Murray in South Australia. And over that 10 years, my role involved going to people and trying to explain how the river works. Who owns the water? What is environmental water? How is it used? What are the benefits of it? But I never really focused much on my patch up the top here. So still in the Murray-Darling Basin, but above those major storages. So our own backyard, right on the doorstep of the nation's capital. And what drew my attention and the attention of many others to the region was the back end of that really short, sharp, intense drought, 2017 to 19, that really hammered that sort of east coast of Australia. And this is the Murrumbidgee at Tharwa, a township just in the southern part of the ACT, where the river ceased to flow and they lost access to this stock and domestic and critical human water needs. So here we are in the nation's capital having to truck water in to a township in the ACT. And I guess myself and others were thinking, hang on, based on what we know about what we're trying to do in the rest of the basin, this shouldn't really be happening. We're trying to protect critical flows for things like critical human water needs. And so at this point, I guess I switched from being the agency person who goes out and explains to people how their rivers work, going, actually, how does this thing work? What are the rules? Do we have environmental flows? Who owns it? Who operates it? All those questions that I was being asked in other parts of the basin. So my brother Simon, who was in that photo earlier, he actually jumped up on Tharwa Bridge and snapped this photo. And I'm glad he did, because it's become a really important photo for us to say, this is where we got to in 2019. So just after this dried up, we then had the Black Summer bushfires, and then we had some really intense rainfall events. So it was drought, it was bushfire, and then a really intense, high flow, highly, chockers full of that bushfire runoff. And there's a glass of it there on the left there. That's using a scientifically approved Great Northern long neck that my brother had with him at the time when we were looking at the river, and he just scooped it up. And you could put a torch behind it and the water and the light couldn't go through the water. So that was what the rivers of the region were getting after ceasing to flow. And you can see that sort of cake that was sort of layered across the whole, the bed of each of these rivers and creeks as well. Now, at the time, I'd been writing a bit of an article called A Letter to Canberrans from the Murrumbidgee River to try and share the story and a bit of history about the river. And after this happened, the article changed a bit and it became a bit more of a call to action. So it was trying to engage the Canberra community to say, hey, we've got this amazing river on our doorstep. And in other parts of the basin, when it was drying out like that, communities were outraged, and rightfully so. But in Canberra, we've got such good water security from our other storages, it didn't register on a lot of people's radar. So this letter was trying to ask people, hey, re-engage with your river and try and give it a hand, because this thing's in a lot of strife. Now, a couple of events were held in 2021, 2022. The first one here on the left is the Native Fish Forum, and that's part of the Native Fish Recovery Strategy. And attending that, I just watched ecologist after ecologist get up and tell a bit of a bad news story about what's happening in the river. So silver perch now considered locally extinct, two-spine blackfish at the time considered locally extinct, maybe just hanging on, but recent surveys have failed to find them. Golden perch missing major age classes in its age structure, so worry about them. And we've also got a really significant population of the EPBC listed Macquarie perch in this stretch of river as well. And I think if we lose that, that's of national significance if we lose that. The second one was the Upper Murrumbidgee Catchment Network's Water Quality and Security Forum. And this is where I learned that the ACT is actually factoring in the Upper Murrumbidgee as its third source of drinking water when we come into dry times. So the obvious question was, and still is, if we'd had another couple of years of drought on the back end of 2019, and the nation's capital had relied on this river for its emergency drinking water, was the water going to be there? And was it going to be of good enough quality that we could actually treat it and drink it? And this is still an ongoing concern that we don't have quite the answer in place for that at the moment. So those two different forums there talked about the importance of this river from a couple of different perspectives. Don't have a preview to my next slide, so this could be yeah, that's right. I'll give a bit of an intro to this one. So this next slide is the most complicated slide I'm going to put up for today, and that's about it. And I guess what we're coming to out of these forums is what's going on with this river. Why is it managed so different, or why does it seem to be managed completely different to the other rivers of the Murray-Darling Basin? And essentially it comes down to we've got three legislative environments interacting in our region. And so I've popped these three legislative environments up here. On the left in the orange is the New South Wales legislative environment. So that's the New South Wales Water Act. And that issues the water licence. Oh, actually, I'll stop there. I'll just go to the second one. Is the Snowy Corporatisation Act, which is the Corporatisation Act which Snowy Hydro Limited operates under. And then the third column there on the right of the room is the Commonwealth Water Act, which implements the Murray-Darling Basin reforms and the water resource plans. Now, I guess firstly, the New South Wales legislation issues a licence to Snowy Hydro for how they can use the water, which is great. Snowy has to operate within that, and they do, and that includes releasing environmental flows. Now, on the right, the Commonwealth Water Act actually has a clause in it which says the basin plan is not to be inconsistent with the Snowy Hydro rules. So it kind of says, hey, we've got some rules in place for this part of the basin. Let's not make something new which contradicts those rules. So it kind of sits outside to some extent. The basin plan can't make anything that's contradictory to those rules in the middle. So we then went on the obvious question, okay, what are these rules in the middle? So I've got the licence there, which is the second box down. The third box down, bear with me on this one, is a document called the Snowy Water Inquiry Outcomes Implementation Deed. It is one of the worst named documents to introduce to a group of people, but it's really significant. So I do actually bring it along every time I present, and here it is. It's about 64 pages long, so it's, actually it is pretty tough to navigate, but it's not overly intimidating. This is the document that underpins the environmental water releases. It's an intergovernmental agreement between New South Wales, Victoria, and the Commonwealth, and this sets out the environmental flow requirements that are enacted through the licence. So this was agreed to in 2002 and hasn't been looked at since. It can be looked at, but never has a review date. So this will never get reviewed unless someone asks for it. And that's what we've been trying to do, is say, hey, this thing is at the start of the millennium drought. We've had the 17 to 19 drought. We've had Murray-Darling Basin reforms. Let's crack this thing open and have a look at it. Now, the final box down the bottom is something called the Snowy Hydro Statement of Expectations. And that's this little document here, about 2.5 pages long. And this is a statement from their shareholders on how they are to operate the scheme. So the two shareholders in Snowy Hydro are the Minister for Energy and the Minister for Finance. So they outline their expectations of what they expect, how they expect Snowy Hydro to operate. Now, this hasn't been updated since the previous government wrote this one. And I guess looking at the far left and the far right columns, those legislative environments are driven by the, the National Water Initiative, trying to get a better balance across economic, social, cultural, environmental for our rivers. This middle column, it's energy and finance portfolios. So the two shareholder ministers are energy and finance. It's got nothing to do with water. So it's not surprising the statement of expectations doesn't mention anything about critical human water needs, environmental values, cultural values, social values. And this makes it completely different to the rest of what we're trying to do in the other parts of the basin. So once we kind of got our head around all this, and this is where the kind of weaving started to happen, because getting our heads around this took a lot of effort and understanding what sits behind these rules. We created a website called the Forgotten River website. And I guess this came from this idea that it's the rules that are running this river are stuck in 2002 and will never be changed unless we ask for it. So the Forgotten River website allowed us to chat to all range of stakeholders and for everyone to input their knowledge, traditional owners, scientists, psychologists, agency staff, operators, bringing this all together so we could create a website where people could actually start to understand why our river's running different. We were able to break it down into simple headings so people could understand what the implications are for the different values, and also what the impacts were for the legislation and what we were asking to change. And then it had an element in it where people could then take action. So if you did want to come in, learn about it and leave, that's fine. But if you did want to kick it up a gear and start to engage your politicians, then that was also available on the website. Okay, just checking the next slide. So this was sort of weaving together with the networks that we had involved in the river. The next step was then to ask the community, what did they value about the river and what did they want to see in its management? So we created a pretty neat survey that was a bit two-way. It was kind of educational, informative, but also asking for feedback on the river as well. And I'm just going to share two results from that survey. The first one, the question about how much of the headwater flows is regulated by Tantangara Dam at the top. And just under 30% of people correctly guessed that it's 90 to 99% of the headwater flows. Now, we're talking about a system with average inflows of sort of 270 to 300 gigalitres a year. And so that 90 to 99% of regulation, where it's then diverted elsewhere for hydropower, is perhaps the single biggest point where we haven't had anybody come up and go, yeah, that sounds about right. Or yeah, that's how you should, yeah, seems like the way to go. It's a really significant point that people go, okay, that we can't continue to run the river in this sort of way. That 99%, which can happen in drought, means that in 1 year, the river only got 3.5 gigalitres for the entire year, which meant over 300 days of zero releases from the dam. So that's the first result. The second result was we asked people, what else in this statement of expectations, what other values did they want to see considered in the rivers management? And I guess not surprising, some of the usual suspects: water quality, environmental values, critical human water needs, cultural values, community engagement, regional development, recreational use, agricultural use, transparency of operations. Pretty much what the National Water Initiative and many of the other water reforms are trying to do. So this is just two of the outcomes from that community survey, and the full survey is available on the Forgotten River website under the Community Voice tab if you want to go and have a bit of a look at it. Now, this was done in November last year, and at the same time, for those of you, linked in with the Murray-Darling Basin water reforms, you'll remember that the refreshing our rivers, that's probably not right. The amendment to the Water Act was going through to extend the delivery of the Murray-Darling Basin plan. So that provided an opportunity for ACT Senator David Pocock, 5 minutes, beauty, to negotiate a package of works to try and recover this river. And so the timing worked out really well. So Senator Pocock was able to negotiate a $50 million package of works, $20 million for on-ground science and monitoring, $5 million to review the old SWIOID, that document there. And there's a $30 million contingency if we needed to purchase water in a drought within the next 3 years. Fair to say we're not going to need that. ACT's water security is enough for the next 3 years. So it's kind of more like a $20 million announcement, which is still significant. But I emphasise this isn't trying to make a good river better. This is trying to take a river that's on life support and try and bring it, try and recover it. So I guess what did we see with some of the factors in terms of achieving success? One is we approached this issue with a really collaborative approach. So we sat down with Snowy Hydro really early on, and they're just operating within the environment that they're asked to operate in. They're a critical piece of infrastructure for our net zero carbon emissions target. They're a huge provider of energy. They're just operating in the rules that they've been given. But even though sort of, the 90% is still something where even I think they went, yeah, okay, that doesn't sound about right. But we went in with a really collaborative approach to everyone and an open and transparent approach to sharing information. All the information we made available by the Forgotten River website, and we try to make it as factual and evidence-based, as possible. If somebody came up with best available information, we changed the website to reflect that. We've had to be flexible and nimble. So I mentioned Shuan at the start. Shuan and I have had to, and even the Restoration Centre team have had to drop other projects to really prioritise this work, often unpaid. And we kind of said, we'll speak to anyone, anywhere, anytime about this river, even if it means driving to Newcastle on a lovely, what day is it? Wednesday afternoon, to come and chat. And we've presented everywhere, universities, we've gone up to Parliament, we've gone to schools, we've gone to community groups and everything. I think this is my second last slide, so just about right. So I'm finishing on this one, which is actually the statement which is at the front of the New South Wales Water Sharing Plan document. The vision for this plan is to provide for healthy and enhanced water sources and water-dependent ecosystems and for equitable water sharing among users in these water sources. Now that's the vision for that water sharing plan. And I can tell you that the water that we give this river to try and do this is nowhere near enough. So there's a massive discrepancy between the two, and we've got a little way, but unless we get further flows for this river, it's going to keep declining. So I'll finish off just showing this mishmash of a range of values that this provides for many in the region, and hoping that these documents can change to start to manage this river for the whole range of values that it provides, and many more that I probably haven't even captured it up here. So thank you, everyone.
Amazing. Thanks, Sandy. So inspiring. I think I first came across enjoying the Murrumbidgee with Antia up there in the corner doing some adventure weeding, and we paddled coir logs up the river to protect habitat after the fires. It was just, such passion. Next up, we're moving to some ecology. So we've got Katherine Warwick from the Western Sydney University, and Katherine's a PhD candidate, and her knowledge has recently become part of some news articles about platypus and the impacts of pollutants on an apex predator. Hydrotrophic order predator, my mistake. So I'd like to welcome Katherine up to present for us. Thank you.
Yes, when I first started, I had a couple of debates about whether or not platypus were an apex predator. So I now say high trophic order. But so I'm going to talk on two different projects that I've been working on recently. This first one I presented down in Victor Harbor, and the second one has been in the news recently. But this first topic that I'll talk on, this work was done on the lands of the Dargin Darawal Nation, and I'd like to extend my respect to those people and those elders and those leaders, and the knowledge that they have with them is just so important to the work that we do. And thank you, Aunty Theresa. So I think we can all agree that platypuses are the coolest creatures on the planet, and that's the hill I'll die on. They are the most unique creature on the planet if we can't agree on the coolest. They are incredibly vulnerable to water pollution. And in that first video that you saw, they're actually bioluminescent, which means that if you shine a UV light on them, that light will then reflect back to you. And that knowledge became apparent when a couple of people were walking down a museum with UV torches, and all of these platypus furs shone back at them. So what a cool thing to walk down the museum at night and see. Platypuses don't have teeth, and that's why their main food source is macroinvertebrates. And so what they will do is store macroinvertebrates in their cheek pouches. Then they will grind those macroinvertebrates up with grinding plates, as you can see in that top picture. And then they'll swallow what's left. So it'll create kind of like a paste. And I think the coolest thing about platypuses is that the boys have spurs. That spur is poisonous. The good news, if you do get spurred, you won't die. The bad news is you'll just wish that you had, because it's apparently so painful, and that pain lasts about 6 months. And painkillers don't work. So like I said, you'll just wish you had. So one of the biggest problems facing platypus is actually people. This first map is a map of where platypus live in Australia. Mostly along the east coast, definitely in Victoria, Tasmania, and we have an introduced population on Kangaroo Island, which I hear they're still going strong there, which is great. This map is population density, and as you can see, we oversect a lot of their home. People and platypuses don't seem to go hand in hand, unfortunately. Some of the biggest causes of platypus death are things like litter, illegal opera house nets, and vehicle accidents. So the point of this study was to look at the impact of heavy metals from mining and other sources of pollution that end up in the water through effluent discharge and surface runoff. Is the metal in the water impacting platypus? And if so, is it coming from their food source? Is it coming from the surrounding water? Can we find it in their fur? And is this potentially a problem that we need to look into? So we looked at two different types of accumulation. The first one is biomagnification. Do we have the, oh, yes. So biomagnification, hey, there we go. Biomagnification essentially happens when you consume food. That food contains a contaminant, and the more you eat that food, the more the contaminant builds up inside you. Now, I have done this graph a little bit differently to how a lot of other ecologists would describe it. So when we look at biomagnification technically, we look at just prey and predator, these two. However, when platypuses forage, as I said, they eat the macroinvertebrates. Macroinvertebrates are actually found in the sediment, and platypuses can inadvertently eat some of the sediment. So we do believe that in order to consider the biomagnification, you also need to consider the sediment as well. And of course, what ends up in the water, especially heavy metals, drops down into the sediment. So in order to consider biomagnification from prey, you also need to consider where the prey is getting their food from. The second thing we looked at is bioaccumulation, and it took me ages to sort these two out in my mind because they're very confusing. But essentially, bioaccumulation, rather than looking at the source of pollution, just considers how you accumulate a pollutant over time. So it doesn't matter where it comes from, but just that it accumulates over time. And so you can see I've used zinc as an example. If you have lots of zinc in your environment, you start off with a little bit, and the longer you live in that environment, it grows and grows and grows. Now, I looked at 3 different sites for this study. The first site is the beautiful, and I would say for an urban site, pristine, Fitzgerald Creek. We caught a lovely little juvenile male called Fitz at this creek. The second 2 sites are less pleasant. Mulgoa Creek sits right next to a tip and a primary school. Not 2 things you'd think would sit next to each other. However, this water was absolutely filthy, and as I was wading through it, I honestly thought I was going to get stuck with a needle, or I was so worried about falling over. It was disgusting. However, we did find a platypus in there, a very healthy male. Go figure. And the third site was just upstream of a mining site. So Tamil Colliery discharges about 5 megalitres. So 2.5 swimming pools. I believe that's how we do our measurements these days, of effluent every day into the Bargo River. Now, we caught 2 platypuses in this area, Draco and Lily. I named them after Harry Potter characters, just for you guys. We caught 2 platypuses in this area, and we did catch them upstream of Tamil Colliery's discharge point. However, I will say that platypuses can have a home range of up to 14 kilometres, so it's safe to say that they were probably foraging down in there. Now, we collected water, sediment, macroinvertebrate, and fur samples. And you can see from that video, it was incredibly cold that night. And that was Lily that we were transferring across into our pouches. Now, we looked particularly at 4 heavy metals. And so I wanted to see if there was a difference between essential metals, so metals that are required for biological function, and non-essential metals, with the idea that in fur, with fur being used as an excretory method, we would see higher levels of non-essential metals in the fur than we would essential metals. How wrong I was. But that was my thought process. Now, we only got 1 platypus at Fitzgerald and Mulgoa Creek, and then 2 platypuses at Bargo Creek. So I will acknowledge that it was not the best sample size, but platypuses are very elusive and they don't like being trapped. So it makes it very difficult to find them. So as I said, I was very, very wrong. So our non-essential metals, majority was found in the sediment, which would be expected. We did find some in the fur. And so if we think about fur being used as an excretory method, we can say that these non-essential metals are sitting there. And they're probably just an indicator that there is a metal pollution in the water, but they don't give us a full picture. So I love it when science goes wrong. I feel like we learn so much more. Now, there were a lot more non-essential metals, so your barium and aluminium, that were found in the macroinvertebrates, their main food source. And I will say that platypuses actually molt annually. So what we may be seeing is a maximum of 12 months of contamination in their fur. So again, it's probably not giving us a whole picture, but it's a good indication of what we're looking for in the system. Now, our essential metals behaved a little bit differently. And like I said, science doesn't always work, especially in the environment. For zinc, we actually did get a typical biomagnification curve. So we had our macroinvertebrates at a smaller concentration than what was found in the fur. And so we could call that a biomagnification curve in the fact that the platypus fur had a higher concentration of zinc. Now, I was actually really surprised to see that because zinc is an essential metal. We do actually need it for lung capacity and other uses like that. And so what we could be seeing is that because it's so high, not that that water thing will tell you, because it's so high in the platypus, they are having to utilize the fur more as an excretory method, as opposed to using a urinary tract, for example. So this study ended up posing a lot more questions than it actually answered. Again, that's science for you. But we found that our essential metals were in higher concentration in the fur than our non-essential metals. This is something that we need to look into in order to determine if this is or isn't significant. And it could be down to the lack of platypus that we had. So if we had a larger data set, we might be seeing something differently. Again, I talked about internal thresholds. So is it just that these essential metals that we were finding, were they in high enough concentration in their internal organs that we were then having to use fur as that excretory method as opposed to our non-essential organs? That could be something that's going around. But I think what we can conclusively say from this is that both essential and non-essential metals did exist in all three systems. They were higher than what they should be, which means that Tamil colliery especially, maybe having to answer some questions about their licensing conditions, and that we should really be going back to point sources of pollution to talk about how we can fix these metals before they come into the water. That's the big one. And of course, the big question is, if we are finding these heavy metals in platypuses, what does that mean on a broader ecosystem? And does this affect the long-term health of platypus essentially? And I'll leave you with some lovely videos for this one. Now, platypuses are rarely considered when it comes to environmental protection licenses or really any kind of water pollution incident. However, we can tell from this study that heavy metals do impact them, that they are accumulating them. And so moving forward, I think any site that has confirmed platypus needs to be considered before any kind of point source pollution ends up in the environment. And we also need to consider platypuses whenever we talk about cleaning up degraded rivers. These are the most iconic species in Australia, and I think they're worth protecting. Even if they don't quite have the threatened species status, I do believe that they still are worth protecting. I'll just let that video finish. And then that is mulga bill that we found at Mulgoa Creek. And you can just see how like red and dirty that water is. And then that's Harry, but different study. So that's Lily. So that one was at the Bargo River. All right, so some of you may have seen in the news recently that we found PFOS in platypus. I've always said that if an environmental scientist gets really excited, it means something bad has happened. So I managed to collect, unfortunately, actually, this was the tragic part, I managed to collect 9 dead platypuses from across New South Wales. And I ended up, sorry for the gory details, cutting those platypuses up, taking a liver sample and getting those liver samples tested. So we actually got quite a broad spread. So 8 of the dead platypuses came from across New South Wales. And, this is a big shout out to our community members because I did not find any of these, and these were community members who handed them in, local government, everyone lended a hand to this project. So, thank you to everyone for actually going out, engaging with your rivers, finding them, handing them in and letting us know. For everyone that did hand one in, they ended up in my freezer and I did end up cutting one up. And fortunately or not fortunately, we also got a dead platypus from Taronga. Her name was Annie. She was 27 years old when she died, which is really old for a platypus. But she sort of became our reference liver, which ended up being really good because all of our wild platypuses came back with a result of PFOS in their liver. Now, I was actually stunned by this result. I thought we'd get a little bit of PFOS maybe in our known hotspots. No, all of our wild platypuses had PFOS. The only one who didn't was Annie. And she comes from a treated system, so I'm not surprised. Our highest recorded PFOS result came from here in Morpeth, so in the Hunter region, with 120 micrograms per kilogram. Our lowest one, aside from Annie, was about 4 micrograms per kilogram. So you can see there's a massive spread. And I was wondering if there was a reason as to why we were getting these high levels. It can't just be the level of contamination in these rivers, although the one at Hunter would suggest that, yes, that could be a contributing factor. However, we managed to link it with the tail fat. So healthier platypuses who had more tail fat tended to have a higher concentration of PFOS than platypuses who didn't have a lot of fat in their tail. Now, the way that we measure tail fat in platypuses is super confusing. So a 1 actually means really fat, and a 5 actually means not fat. And so that's why that scale looks like that. And it took me ages to work it out in my head as well. So give yourself a break if you're super confused. But it means if you have more fat on your body, you tend to eat more. That's generally how it works. So if you're eating more and you're consuming more, particularly your macroinvertebrates, if macroinvertebrates consume the PFOS, then you are getting it solely from your food source. Now, this study didn't look at macroinvertebrates as that source of contamination, but this is the next step in this project, that if we are getting this correlation between tail fat and PFOS, does this mean it's coming from our food source rather than just our river contamination? And if that is the case, what does that mean for any kind of water contamination that we are getting in these hotspots? What happens to PFOS once it enters the water? Now, I do apologize for that gory picture. That is actually a liver of a platypus. It's actually quite big. So I will say that. Now, what we can take away from this is that PFOS is far more widespread than we initially thought. So I actually spent months and months Googling PFOS hotspots in New South Wales, and I came across a couple of websites, and only one of the platypuses turned up in a hotspot site. The rest of them were not near any known hotspots. And that, of course, was our Morpeth one, which was near an airport hotspot. So PFOS far more widespread than initially thought. Considering the levels that we found in the livers, PFOS is probably a hyperaccumulator. That's also based on other research that's been done of other animals across the globe as well. And what is curious is that the highest concentrations are being found in the youngest platypuses. So all of our juveniles had the highest concentrations. And leads me to believe if this is coming from their food source or if it's coming from their food source and potentially mother's milk as well. We are having studies that are finding it in mammal milk. So if anyone wants to go down that avenue, come join us at Western. 3 minute, perfect. And so future direction of this is we are looking to find PFOS in macroinvertebrates. And I will say off the record, it's in macroinvertebrates. We are also looking for non-lethal sampling methods. So I don't always want dead platypuses in my freezers. I want to go out, find the cute live ones, take a first sample and see if that can be a bioindicator for PFOS. And then what we're doing now is actually going to these areas where we are finding these high levels of contamination and doing an in-depth ecological study so that when councils reach out to us and say, hey, you've got a platypus with PFOS in one of our areas, can you tell us more? We can actually say, yeah, we'll go out, we'll do an in-depth analysis and we can provide you with a bit more understanding and background of it. And there we go. And that's where we're at. But thank you.
We've come to the end of our presentation night, and I'd really like to thank our speakers for coming all the way to Newcastle. None of our speakers are local to us, so let's give them a round of applause for coming to speak to us. I'd also like to thank the City of Newcastle for hosting us in this building, and we really appreciate that support. I'd like to also thank Hunter Local Land Services for their support of the event as well in supporting the technology side of things. I'd like to say quickly, from River Basin Management Society, thank you for coming. We'd love for you to get involved with us. I'll be sending out the presentation recording so you can have a look at it and share it. I'd also like to say we've got a mentoring program open at the moment. So if there's anyone out there who thinks they'd like to be a mentee or a mentor, we'd love to have you to help build the next generation of river people, I guess. That closes November 22nd. We have our ephemeral newsletter, and then there's lots of events coming up. We're going to do some online webinars and then even more local events. Come chat to me if you have something you'd like to organise as well. So We're going to finish up in here. Some of us are going to walk over to the Clarendon Hotel. So come and join us if you like. If you want to buy some dinner and get a drink, have a chat. We'd love to see you there. It's only a short walk. And yeah, thank you so much for coming.